Hello, I'm Aisha al-Adawiya, and I have something to say. Well, I was called to this path rather than choosing it. I was born and raised in the southern United States, and I grew up in an environment where that was the culture of people helping other people. So that came rather naturally to me.
Your parents and your community?
My parents, my extended family, my community. As you know, in my generation, living in the South, in Alabama specifically, it was a segregated South, segregated and very much unequal. So people were called to look out for each other and to help each other. So that's a good tradition. So it seemed to just be part of my DNA. And I actually enjoy being with people. And if I have something to offer in any small way, I'm really honored to do that. Yeah. I came north to pursue a singing career. And I landed in Greenwich Village in the early 60s. And after a time, I encountered Malcolm X, and life just took on a completely different meaning.
Did you get very involved in his movement? Or just
I
inspired?
didn't join the nation, but I was totally inspired by his critique of injustice in this country and really around the world. Because of my roots and seeing racism and injustice really very much up close and personal, I was totally moved, by his message and his critique. So that was my journey. I was born and raised in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So that says a lot already, yeah. The African Methodist Episcopal Church. I was in the choir. We went to Sunday school every Sunday. So a lot of my life was molded by the experience of growing up in that environment. So a lot of those teachings live with me today, yes. I was always considering myself to be on a spiritual journey, a quest. As a young child growing up in the South, I remember yearning for some way to express myself beyond what I had, and so I was always looking. One thing that attracted me as a young girl, that Catholics crossed themselves, and I thought that was amazing. It was some kind of outward expression of that. So I wanted to become a Catholic, and so I went to the Catholic Church and, let them know that I wanted to become a Catholic. And of course, the separate, entrances were still at work here. So I was given, the catechism, read this material and come back. Well, I never came back. But I have always been on this spiritual quest, needing something more. And, as Allah would have it, being in Greenwich Village, the health food fad was a fad then. And a lot of young people, this is the early 60s, were really ripping up old models, creating new realities for themselves, including researching and discovering new spiritualities for themselves. So I was a part of that. So it was in that very heady environment that I found, of course, we were reading books on the occult, anything that we could find to help us understand, what are we here for? What is this existence about? And there was this bookstore on Broadway and West 8th Street. It was called Wisner's Bookstore. It was an occult bookstore. So you could go in there and find pretty much anything, Eastern religion, right, as it was called. And it was there that I found a Quran in an occult bookstore. I mean, just amazing.
That's a great story.
Yeah, so from then it became like a quest, like this is something that resonates with me. I'm still researching, I'm learning, I'm inspired by different things that I'm reading about different religions. So, we looked at Buddhism, Hinduism, everything that we could find. And it was years after Malcolm was assassinated that I actually became a Muslim. So, yeah. But the health food environment, to give up a lot of the habits that we had, smoking, drinking, the clothing was getting longer, the head wraps were going, but I still, hadn't embraced Islam. So, as I said, it was much after he was assassinated that it came, and it's time, to take the next step. And it's been an awesome journey ever since.
It seems like you became a leader early on in your journey.
Well, I shy away from, labels, I just try to find the work that I can do with integrity. Somehow I'm really challenged to have to do things that I really don't believe in. So I tend to steer away from those things. I used to fight and, be confrontational. But I learned over time that it's better to make the path by walking, So, yeah. At that time, it was about my own. Evolution. In the 60s, we felt we were free and that we could do anything that we wanted to do. A lot of it was great, but some of it was very destructive also. So I saw, all of that, and I think being raised in the South, and in a religious environment, I was protected from a lot of the destructive things that were happening at that time. I didn't see it that way at the time because I wanted to be with the in crowd. So I was blessed, to be protected from a lot of things that were happening. But I knew that I needed something to guide my life, because I saw what I could do, and I wanted to be whole, and I wanted to be okay with myself first, and whatever manifested itself out of that experience, that internal experience, then that's what it was. So my initial focus was on myself. Yes. Well, all of that was there, anti-war stuff happened, but Malcolm's message was just resonating everywhere, because not only not in the South, but just generally, Black people didn't know anything about our history and our culture for the most part. I mean, we just weren't, that was hidden from us. So to be able to begin to learn about who we were or are as a people, and history beyond the enslavement period was just awesome, So that continues, to unfold for me, and being in a place like this, Actually, I came, as many of my colleagues did, we were just passing through, of course, the Schomburg Center, it was like the Schomburg Center, the premier institution for documenting and, preserving, interpreting the African experience, the African diasporan experience. So it was like, yeah, I could do that. I'd love to do that. So I came on a part-time basis for a few years, actually. Each time I completed assignment, they would ask me to come back. My first project was working with the director, right? He was starting a capital campaign, and he just asked me, would I stay on, through the capital campaign? So I was like a secretary, doing a range of things within that space, including secretarial duties. And this was a time before we had the new part of the building. This is the landmark part of the building, but that was the part of the capital campaign that created the lobby that you pass through, the Langston Hughes Theater, and then the manuscripts, archives, and rare books division. All of the new part of the complex. This is the landmark building on 135th Street, right? That was the initial Schomburg Library.
Right.
But we are a research unit of the New York Public Library.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how I came. And at one point, it took so long to keep calling you back. He said, why don't we just, create a job for you to stay? And at the time, I was, quite frankly, not interested in a full-time job because I was used to kind of doing what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. I had businesses before, several businesses. I love beautiful things, jewelry, scarves. In the 60s, I used to manage a boutique in Greenwich Village for years. I lived across the street and I worked in this little gift shop. So I admired all of the things that were there. The owner used to travel all over the world, and he would bring back all of these beautiful things from these countries that he visited, and then just put them in the windows. Yeah. So I wore all of that. I loved, self-adornment. Yeah. So anyway, that's. I had a business called Decorative Arts, right? And what it was is that we took beautiful lithographs, right? And mounted them on wood, right? And pressed the lithograph into the wood so that it looked like it was actually painted on the wood, right? And then we doctored that and made it look like an antique. It was beautiful. We actually sold them to antique stores. Yeah. So that was that. But, I'll back up a little bit. I had an aunt, a great aunt that I lived with growing up as a girl in the South. And she was a seamstress, yeah, but she really was a designer. And one of my favorite stories about her is that you've heard of the Sears Roebuck. They had this huge catalog, yeah. So you could just buy anything out of this catalog.
Right.
So women would come to her with this catalog and show her the dress that they wanted made.
And she could create it?
So they would ask her how much fabric did they need for that, and she would look at the photograph and tell them how much fabric to buy. And of course,
quite a skill.
Amazing, so she would make this incredible dress. Now, as a young girl, I inherited all of her scrap fabrics. So my dolls were the best dressed dolls in town, because I could make these beautiful outfits from the scraps that she saved for me.
That's excellent.
It's just beautiful.
Training.
Really love it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So, Women in Islam, I founded in the early 90s in direct response to the rape atrocities that were happening in Bosnia at that time. And the overwhelming majority of the women who were being victimized happened to have been Muslim women. And I felt at the time that there needed to be a Muslim voice somewhere in the conversation about what was happening to Muslim women. Yeah. So it was then that I created this organization, and really, on some level, forced myself into the conversation about what was happening to women, who were Muslim women, how did Islam treat women, because there was and continues to be a lot of misconception about Muslim women and about how they are viewed within the Islamic religion. So I took that on. And this was a time also that, the feminist movement was very much visible in support of the women who were being victimized there. And at the time, abortion on demand was a very big issue. And of course, a lot of the women were being impregnated and other things that were happening to them. Wow, those are memories that are flooding me now. So what I did was, first was to make the case that, it was not always the case where the feminist movement was open to religious women, right? Not to mention Muslim women. So I had to establish the fact that I could be Muslim, right, and still stand for the liberation of women, right? And that continues to be a conversation that we have. So, so I wanted, to be able to have a Muslim voice, not necessarily mine, but to hear other Muslim women be part of the conversation in terms of how we spoke about Muslim women and Islam in general. So that was part of that struggle.
Was there pushback from the establishment? I mean,
which establishment?
Muslim women are often not heard from for lots of institutional reasons. Well, so you were really...
I just carve out, as I said, you just, instead of, you just carve out what it is that you need to do, and it's interesting, doing crises seems to be a moment when a lot of the repressive stuff kind of recedes and women gain a position, right, that may not have been there ordinarily, right?
So the first crisis
this was one of those times.
Was a moment.
It was one of those moments, 9/11 was another moment, So women are constantly pushed to the front in these times, Yeah, so I advocate that don't cede that ground, hold it, keep it. We are a small nonprofit. We have a huge footprint. And we are a human rights organization. But at the same time, we also, our work is on education and advocacy. So our primary call is to educate ourselves and the larger society about Islam, right? And how does Islam treat women, right? Who are Islamic women, and what do our traditions have to say about that, right? And that's an ongoing conversation to this day. So our work, there was all kinds of forums being organized because, again, when tragedy hits, suddenly everybody wants to know about Islam, who are these people, where'd they come from, what is this religion? Yeah. So then, it's an opportunity to educate, Well, there was the transatlantic slave trade, many of those Africans who were kidnapped and brought here were Muslims, right? It's a story that's rarely heard. It's beginning to gain more prominence because more scholars are now doing that kind of research to uncover, those, what one of our scholars here calls the hidden evidences of that experience. So, yeah. We are locally based, and certainly our work is national, but the implications are international as well. Many of our people here living in the United States also have relationships back home, right? So when we talk, and a lot of the same issues that we face here, women and societies are facing abroad. So the message translates, on an international level. And in addition to that, we collaborate with other organizations. We do a lot of interfaith work. We do a lot of peace building, a lot of documentary work, on this experience. Quite a few years ago, there was a community meeting, and it was a town hall.
In Harlem?
Actually, it was in one of the larger mosques here in the city. And something had happened, I don't remember what it was, but it demanded a conversation, for the broader community. So we had there was a consultative body that called this town hall. So all of the Muslims came and whoever else wanted to come to this town hall. And the men had the mic to open the program, the leader of this Shura Council, and just fielding questions from the people who were in the audience. And the men were talking a lot, because they were given the mic to express whatever they had to express. And so they had the mic. At some point, the mic was handed to me. My understanding was that the women were going to have the same opportunity to express themselves individually as the men had expressed themselves. They didn't ask one man to represent all of the men, so I didn't expect that. So that's exactly what happened. I was called on, and probably because I had some recognition because of the work that we had been doing through our organization, and through relationships that we had built within the community. So I was given the mic and told that Sister Aisha will speak on behalf of the women, right? That was not what I had in mind, or understood that would be the case. So when I was handed the mic, I offered it to the other women who were there, who definitely had something to say, about the issue. And it's amazing, I can't even remember what the issue was. But at one point, a woman stood up and said, if you want to know what the problem is, just look in the mirror. It's just amazing. We're sitting in the mosque. It's just like, normally have that kind of confrontation, so it's like, wow. So at some point, everybody's having their say, and the women have their say, to the point that I was asked to hand back the mic now, right? So it's like, well, no, because all of the women haven't had a chance to speak, those who wanted to speak. And also, I have to remind them that because they took some of the time away from the women to give more men the opportunity to speak, I wanted to keep the mic a little longer so that we give the opportunity for more women to speak. So that continued for a while, and they are now really telling me, well, time's up, you need to hand back the mic, and say, well, no, you want to have the time back that you took from us. So one colleague who was visiting from South Africa, he emailed me later and said, I looked around and I wondered, who is that woman who refuses to go away? Stand in the fire and refuse to go away, and that's what I see in the honorable woman, that you're extending this honor to me for. Yeah.
That's such a great.
I have something to say. Yeah.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
That's really excellent advice for younger women. Do you have any other advice that you would like to give to younger activists while we're with you?
Yeah, and especially now, each generation is different, of course, So now we have the millennials, and they're amazing. I mean, they're brilliant on so many levels. My advice is, as a Muslim organization, I advise and I try to root our work in the organization in our religious traditions, right? So that's part of extending yourself to learn what does your religion have to say about social justice. What does it say? What is the example of the prophet? Where did he stand on certain social justice issues, right? And who were the women around him, right? And what were their lives like? What did they do? A lot of that history, it has not been forwarded. So we are encouraging them to take the very difficult, disciplined task to delve into those sciences, right? Because they have to learn Arabic. They have to learn a lot of things in addition to getting degrees at all of the Ivy League universities. In addition to that, they have to be able to go back to the sacred texts, right? Especially when they are going up against the status quo, right? Because without it, you can be labeled or charged or dismissed on so many grounds, right? But when you present this argument with that ammunition, right, it becomes more difficult for pushback to sustain itself, because now you're referencing the very tradition that those who are in opposition to the full liberation of women will use to diminish their voices. So that becomes very important for us. So we advocate that everybody's not going to do this, but those who get the calling, that's what it is, right? That we encourage them to do that, and then begin to create pathways for them to walk that path, because that has not been an easy, accessible path for women, right? So that has to change, right? And so we're beginning to see some movement in that direction, that women have to have the opportunity to access that knowledge as well, so that they can become the interpreters, they can become the judges, they can issue fatwa. This is the level that they have to do. And in addition to that, we're saying it's important not to be arrogant, and we live in a society that dictates that it's about us. It's just, we're awesome and that's it, and the more prominence you get, the more arrogant you can become. I mean, it's a drug, So we try to get that message out that you can be powerful and bad, but don't be arrogant, because that's, again, going back to our tradition, that was not the way of our leader, our prophet, right? And so you can say everything that you need to say, and you can do everything that you need to do, right? There's something called adab, right? And it's how does one conduct oneself in the public arena, yeah? So That's part of the message, you know. But we also encourage them to stand up for what they think is right, you know. And sometimes that's against their own families, you know. There are many young girls who want to practice Islam a certain way, but their parents think that, well, no, for many reasons, right? We don't want them to do that, you know. So when they choose those paths, many of them who actually embrace Islam are disowned by their families, you know. So to always honor their parents and their elders, you know, always, you know, even when you make choices that they may not approve of. Yes, but you have to honor them, you have to be respectful. So these are some of our African traditions also, and some of our Southern traditions that are carryovers, you know. And many other people who carry these views that disrespect is not an option, you know. You can have opponents, you know, without being, what did Martin Luther King say? We can disagree without being disagreeable, something like that.
Also good advice.
Yeah. So yeah, but mainly to encourage them to stand up. You have to fight. You know, you don't just go with the flow. You know, Malcolm used to say, if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. You know, it's so true, you know. But in order to stand for something, you have to know what you're standing for and what is the foundation on which you are standing, you know. And it's not about your ego, you know, or being arrogant, you know. And to find a way to communicate with people outside of your own opinion or your own view or your own religion, right? Because many allies, many friends, even love relationships that develop out of our interfaith work, you know, I mean, just awesome people. I mean, actually, it's an environment that I cherish, you know, and often prefer over any other community, you know, because people come very strong in their own beliefs, and then we say, what does our belief call us to do in relation to bringing about social justice for everybody? It's beautiful, you know. So you don't have to explain anything, you know. You believe in whatever you believe in, and it has to go beyond people who adhere to some traditional faith, you know. It applies to anybody, you know, who carries this passion, you know, for social justice for everyone, not just our families or our children or our co-religionists, you know. So many stories. Yeah.
That's very inspiring.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
Thank
think
you.
Keep talking.
Oh, God, you know, it's like
we'll have
really,
to come back and do that again.
I have to actually leave New York and go to a place. I have in my mind a cottage, probably covered with flowers or I don't know what, by the ocean, right? And there would be a path for someone to bring me food, you know, and leave it by the door, you know, and go away, right? And then I would just be in this lovely environment, and maybe I would write then, right?
So that's going to be your writer's retreat, your memoirs.
Yes, it's a record in my head, right? But I don't know. I'm called, you know, to do things, but I'm also looking at transition. Because I never wanted the organization or my work to be about me, but to really chart a path for other Muslim women. Yeah. And the path that says you don't have to be a superwoman, you know, to do this, right? That anybody can walk this path, right? Yeah, so that's the message.